Welcome everyone to this week's episode of Variologies. This is Dan Calcagno.
And Noah Calcagno.
And we're here again remotely via video conferencing so that we can still get together and chat and have an episode. But of course, we are not in person due to the situation that must not be named, because then we won't be able to monetize this video eventually. Did you know that about YouTube?
No, they're not letting you monetize videos that talk about it?
Yeah, same with Facebook. I tried to do a Facebook post for our podcast, and I mentioned coronavirus. Whoops. And it wouldn't let me do it because it said that they're not letting people, I don't know, take advantage of the situation, I guess. So,
that's interesting.
So, yeah. In fact, people out there on the internet have been doing it by just referring to something else, but we all know what they're referring to. So
right, yeah.
We'll have to come up with one ourselves eventually. Nevertheless, the situation that must not be named is still going on, so we're doing our episodes remotely. And this week's episode, we are going to talk about something in the political realm. And I think it comes from the fact that I have a sister and you have an aunt who sometimes posts things about the British monarchy.
Yep.
And I think even you posted something about the British monarchy the other day. And
technically also the Canadian monarchy.
Well, right, the Canadian monarchy. That's right, I suppose. Yeah. And I guess what we're going to be talking about is, should there even be a Canadian or British monarchy? And every time one of you posts about the monarchy, I annoyingly, on purpose, try to be annoying, and I try to say, no king but Jesus.
Yep.
Because my position is that Christians should not believe in or support the idea of having a monarchy or really any kind of political system other than devotion to God and Jesus as our king. But we already did that. I got the opportunity a few weeks ago in our Don't Tread on Morality podcast episode to talk about the libertarian anarchist position, and I felt like that was a really good conversation. But I think this is an opportunity for you, Noah, to go a little deeper into that position for you. So I'm eager to hear that. But how's life been? How was Holy Week, Easter weekend, and all that? How have things been going over in your neck of the woods?
It's been good. It was definitely a weird Easter experience this year, just like obviously not gathering together and doing the things we normally do around Easter time, right? But it's almost like, I know Protestants tend not to celebrate Lent, but it's almost like the whole world was in Lent, because it was just everyone was just kind of locked in their houses, had minimal sort of amenities and stuff like that. So it's definitely been an interesting time. This past week, I've had online classes come back, which has been nice because I know the last couple of times we've checked in on the podcast, I've been talking about how I've just kind of reverted to being a 15-year-old kid playing video games all the time. So it's been nice to have something to actually wake up and do and be productive with. So that's been my last week.
Right. Well, good. I'm glad things got a little more normal for you in terms of having, if Jordan Peterson has taught me anything is that you have to at least get up and make your bed. Otherwise, you're not going to feel good about yourself. So if you're just getting up and playing video games, then that's not the best feeling in the world. Though I have to report that Sarah and I are very close to beating Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze.
That's always good.
We're on the final boss, actually, so I'm looking forward to playing that tonight. After, like I said, I do work during the day, and we have a toddler. But after all that said and done, we just like to get frustrated playing Nintendo games. So there you go. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with the topic for this week's episode. How would you put it? Are we talking about just the idea of whether or not Christians should support a monarchy, or how would you characterize the position and maybe the topic of today's episode?
Yeah, I think that's partly it. Like, I wouldn't consider myself like hardline, like a monarchist, like every country needs to have one. But I think, well, first of all, for Canada, I think there's just for cultural reasons, I think it's an important institution in Canada because a big part of the reason our nation formed was in reaction to American encroachment in the South. And a lot of people in Canada are descended from loyalists who moved here in the wake of the American Revolution because they wanted to stay loyal to the crown and stuff like that. I know it's 200, 300 years later, but it is an important part of our history. And when we formed Confederation, it was, especially at that point, the War of 1812 was a few decades beforehand, and it was a way of saying, you know what, we value our British heritage, we value the institution of the crown, and for the French as well, they wanted to protect their culture, so we kind of banded together, kind of with the threat of the Americans in the South. And again, obviously, with today's the way geopolitics are today, that's not a threat so much anymore. But the point is, it is just, as far as our culture and our heritage here, that is a pretty important part of it. But as far as the reason for having a monarchy in general, and this, again, this is where it kind of becomes like, it's not just, oh, I think we need to have a king or queen in every country. I wouldn't, that's obviously not realistic. What I do think is important, though, is that every country has a strong sovereign at the top, because I think man is naturally hierarchical, right? Like, we tend to put ourselves into hierarchies. And I think our government system needs to reflect that. So whether that's a president in a republic or a king in a monarchy, I think that that's important for a government to function well and to flourish.
So, would you say that by having a strong sovereign at the top, and you're right, I do think that we have evolved to function within hierarchies. That the way we survived was to put our trust in somebody at the top, somebody to guide us, and not everyone can be the leader, and so on and so forth. However, in the kind of societies that we have now, where there is at least a semblance of freedom, that we don't, even in countries where there is still a monarchy, like in England, they don't. It's not like a dictatorship. So, what positive thing would it do for a country to have a strong sovereign? And
Yeah.
just how would you go about answering that?
Yeah. Well, there's a quote by a historian. His name is Hilaire Belloc, and he said that Britain is a monarchy that functions like a republic, and the United States are a republic that functions like a monarchy. And what he meant by that is, in a lot of Commonwealth countries now, the parliament has all the power and the monarch has none. And maybe that's a good thing depending on your point of view. But what he's saying is, in the United States, there's the Congress, there's a Senate, and then there's the president. And the president has, he has executive power. He has the ability to veto. He's the commander in chief. And those are responsibilities typically associated with a monarch historically in a lot of ways. So what he's saying is that in the United States, we see someone with those responsibilities. And I think honestly, the only problem with the United States is that I don't think anyone's given enough term, because, like, for example, Trump will have 4 years and he'll have another 4 years, and then someone can just completely undo what he just did. And that's why in the States, like, who becomes president matters a lot more in a lot of ways than who becomes prime minister here, because they have this time where they can just, implement different things, and they can have a vision for these 8 years of what they want to accomplish. And then here in Canada, it's basically like we go back and forth between conservatives and liberals, just arguing about the same things all the time. And you get that in the States, but to a lesser degree, because the president is actually he has that executive power to make things happen long term. I think that's good for a country, because it kind of gives the country a vision to get behind and go forward.
Yeah. Okay. So that makes sense. I mean, I think that without a vision for any organization, and if you want to maximize it out to a country, then there will be sort of a certain degree of aimlessness, and not being able to have a functioning society, a functioning, like a society that works well, people that work well together to have a functioning society. But why would you? And if you don't, that's fine. You can just correct me. But why would you advocate for, like would you say that you would want that within the current system, or would you want that within a new way of organizing countries, where people who are more like-minded could come together? Because, as you already alluded to, we have people on different sides constantly arguing with one another, and the only reason why some people get to implement their vision is because they're a majority at the time, at least. And I don't think a majority rule is ethical, is moral. So, and I can unpack that in a second.
Yeah.
But just maybe just answer the question of, like, are you talking about in the current organization of countries, or would you envision
Yeah,
maybe something different?
that's part of the reason I believe that monarchy is a better system than republicanism, is because that um, you're right. In like the American system, the president is a partisan figure, but in a monarchy, theoretically, even though obviously the monarch would have their own opinions and way of looking at things, in theory they're apolitical and they make decisions based on what they feel is best for the country. And historically, like before World War I, when the majority of the British or of the European nations were monarchs, that's what they would do. It would be these parties with their different ideas and their different plans for the country, and then there had to be, the queen had to, the queen or the king or whatever would have to sign it into law, and back then they had more input in this process, and they would even be involved in crafting these laws because despite the conservatives wanting one thing, the liberals wanting one thing, they would be like, they were the kind of, sort of, in theory, the unbiased final voice on the things, like on the matters. And yeah, even before that, like, I think in light of the American Revolution, a lot of times we view the monarchy as inherently corrupt, especially during that time period. But it was also a check on, oligarchs and people in the background who were trying to manipulate the system for their own gain, because a lot of these monarchies in days past, they felt it was, a responsibility given to them by God. And even if you don't believe in the divine right of kings, there is a sense in which whoever is in power is given that power from God, in a sense. And I know you might not agree with that necessarily, but um, they did have that feeling, at least, of being responsible for these people from God, and that impacted the way that they governed, because they wouldn't want to take bribes, they wouldn't want to take all these handouts, because they knew that they were supposed to be protecting the integrity of the country. So even though all these voices were coming from all these different um, sides of them trying to convince them to do one thing or the other, they knew that their responsibility was to do what was ultimately best for the country, as best as they knew how.
How would people decide, or how would people know who the king or queen is? Who gets to determine who the king or queen is?
That's a little bit of a tricky question historically, because prior to the Reformation, it was by like approval from the Pope.
Oh,
But
okay.
then since the Reformation, um, I think again it would still be kind of in tandem with the church. Like I think the Church of England, the Bishop of Canterbury would have to recognize you as the legitimate monarch, and that's why there have been wars of succession, right? Like a couple days ago was the anniversary of the battle where the Hanovers, which is like the house that Queen Victoria was from, beat the Jacobites for the throne in England, for example. So like there have been wars over this based on who descended from who and all that sort of thing. But ultimately, I think the church has played a role in that, historically, at least.
Does that mean that the church and state wouldn't be separated any longer? That we would want to bring those two things back together, so to speak? Or
Well, on a technical level, there isn't separation between church and state in Britain,
I was going
like
to
at least
say, isn't it?
technically.
Yeah,
Like I don't think Anglicanism is the state religion in Canada, though.
right. I
But
don't know if we
so
have it.
it is possible to do without a state religion. It's just it always has gone hand in hand.
Right. What about people who don't want to live under a king? What would happen to them?
I mean, do you mean historically or do you mean in theory?
Well, okay. Well, are we talking about history, and history's fine to talk about it because it allows us to see how it was done, and
Yeah.
to sort of work out how we could possibly do it. But I guess
Hmm.
we're talking about more about hypothetical.
Yeah.
If we could determine the political systems of a
Right.
geographical region, what would you do with me who doesn't want to live under a king?
Well, I mean, you already do. Like, I don't know. That's hard to answer. It's like in the States when Trump got elected and they're like, oh, he's not my president. It's like, okay, but you still live here and you're still a
Right.
citizen. So he is, in a sense. Like, it doesn't matter if you like it.
Right, right, exactly.
Like,
So, but the reason why I and other people, who don't want to live under a certain political leader, go along with it without causing any issues is because I know what would happen to me if I didn't. There's the threat of force.
fair enough.
There's the threat
Yeah.
of fines or imprisonment if I didn't pay taxes or if I didn't follow the laws I don't agree with. So,
Hmm.
is that what you would think that we should do in a society that has a monarch? Have the threat of force?
Well, I don't know what you mean. Like, if you mean like you're gonna have an armed rebellion against the monarch, like that's obviously not going to end well. Like any country would defend against that. But if you're just like, I don't like that I live under a king, I don't really recognize him as a king, like I don't think that would change anything. Like we're not in a day and age where you would be like hung for treason for saying that. Like you could live in a country that has a monarch and object to it, and I don't think anything would happen to you.
Right, fair enough. And that's when you leave it on the level of speech, I guess. As long as you're just declaring I don't want to live under a monarchy, but you don't do anything about it, that's probably nothing to be concerned of if you're the monarch. So I'll give you an example. Under a monarchy, would taxation be a thing?
Well, it is already.
Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
if you live under a monarchy and you disagree with taxation as an institution, and especially, let's say, and I'll bring it into an area where even you will have some trepidation. Taxation going towards abortions, right? What if taxes going towards like Planned Parenthood or whatever the Canadian equivalent is, right? What if you don't want to pay those taxes because you disagree on the one hand with the institution of taxation because you believe it's theft,
Mm-hmm.
then or on the other hand because you disagree with what the money's being used for? What if you just protested and said, I'm not paying taxes, I'm not supporting this monarchy? What would happen?
Yeah. Again, I think just no matter why you're protesting the fact you're paying taxes, the government's going to do something about it, you know?
Right. Yeah. Is that okay? Is that moral? Is that something that should be done?
Well, you signed a social contract by being.
You actually believe in a social contract?
No. But I don't really know how to answer this question because like taxes are just kind of a reality of life at this point. So like even if I mean, no one likes paying them, but the reality is we all have to, at least for now, right? Like,
Because we are threatened with fines or prison if we don't.
yes.
The areas in which we don't have to pay, like there's not too many people who voluntarily give money to the government, right?
Right, yeah. No one's donating to the government.
Right. I guarantee you, if we weren't forced to pay taxes, then maybe some people would give money to the government, but I would venture to say a lot of us wouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
So the only reason why we do it is because we're forced to, or at least with the threat of punishment if we don't. And what I'm saying is that from a moral perspective, people who believe in morality, like if you are amoral, I don't really care what you have to say, honestly, but we both believe in morality, right? So from a moral perspective, taxation is not something that is moral. It's not ethical from a perspective that says theft is something that's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Force is something that's wrong because slavery is wrong. So how can you justify it in your political theory or in your political viewpoint? You have to address that, right? Otherwise, or you could say that you just believe in an immoral political system, which is fine. People can do that.
Which is fine. People can do that.
I wouldn't do that, but you can if you want. I'm obviously challenging you, right? I'm not trying to be a jerk.
Yeah. Well, no. To be honest, when it comes to taxing, like I know, like we've talked about a bunch of times, like, and I know it's something you care a lot about, and to an extent I do too. But it's just not like when I'm thinking of political philosophy, like my mind doesn't really go there because I just kind of take it as for granted that no matter who's in power, it's something that it's just the reality that we're gonna have to pay taxes no matter who's in power. You know?
Yeah.
Like whether it's a queen or a president, or whether like even if we become Ancapistan, where it's like just a bunch of anarcho-capitalist communities, we're still going to be like, even though it might not be taxes and it would be more voluntary, which is what you would prefer, it's still something you're still going to have to pay somebody for that sort of protection and for the sort of responsibilities the government takes on.
Fair enough. But that's kind of the point. Taxation to me is just an example. It very well demonstrates the point I'm trying to make, which is, should we have a political system in which force is the way things are done, or can we possibly do things without force? And the example that I gave in our last episode that we talked about politics, I said if you don't like a particular company, you do not have to use their services or products. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
So in an anarcho-capitalist society, ideally what we would have is people providing services, usually, any of the legitimate services that government currently provides, would be provided by competing companies, and you wouldn't have to use a particular company's services if you didn't want to. You didn't have to pay anybody. Actually, so to be more accurate, in an anarcho-capitalist society, you didn't have to pay anyone for those services. You'd just probably be pretty screwed if you didn't,
Yeah.
right? Like, so the idea is you pay for what you need, but nobody's forcing you to use their services. All the
Yeah.
government is just people, right?
I know.
This is what I don't understand about your position is like, who are these people? Who are these magical people that are gonna, lead us and not be corrupt? Aren't they gonna be corrupt?
Yeah, but I think like again, and the reason like because I was with you with the anarcho-capitalist stuff for a little bit,
Sure.
and ultimately what led me away from that, I think I touched on this last time, was there is a certain degree where force is necessary to keep people like, because if we went into an anarcho-capitalist society, right, and there was a bunch of different communities and like people organize themselves differently, like unfortunately not everyone is as high-minded as us when it comes to this. Like if that happened, all that would happen there would be a power vacuum that worse people would fill. Perhaps people who are more violent, perhaps people who are more like, I don't think that if we just got rid of borders and got rid of government, it would just everyone would go on living the same way they do now. I think it would be all these different communities forming and like people seizing power for themselves,
Yeah, but I don't really understand. I think I said this when we had that conversation.
Yeah.
I don't really understand that argument because you're saying that that's a bad thing, right? Like we don't want there to be a power vacuum to be filled by people who are corrupt and evil, right?
Mm-hmm.
All of the power currently is centralized under one. In a monarchy, it's very, very centralized under one person, right?
Yeah.
What are the chances that person's not going to be corrupted? I guess that's a rhetorical question. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't mean literally. What are the
Yeah.
chances? But like, what I'm saying is like, that person more often than not is going to be corrupted. So I would much rather have an ideal person, and in our case, it's Jesus,
Yeah.
be the figurehead of our government, of our society. But it's not a literal person. Now if and when Jesus returns, great,
Yeah.
but currently it's not a literal person here right now telling us what to do, because quite frankly God doesn't work that way, right? God allows freedom of the will, and if we want to go our own way we can, but we face the consequences. That's the kind of society we would have, that we would hold to an ideal as a society. It would be a recognition of moral rules. And people who say, well, how are you going to have a society where people recognize moral rules? Well, we all recognize these rules already. We just don't apply them consistently. That's all. Most people believe murder is wrong, theft is wrong, assault is wrong, slavery is wrong, right? We just don't apply them consistently because we think that, government's the exception. But why should government be the exception?
Yeah, but I think my point is like, okay, yes, maybe the government uses, or obviously the government uses force, but my point is that taking away the government won't stop other people from doing the same thing, just probably at a worse level.
Okay.
Because if, like, in a lot of ways, the government being there is like, people know that if they murder people, if they enslave people, if they do these things, they'll go to prison for it. So as much as, it sucks that the reality is the threat of force is there, it's like, without that, there's no check on the people who don't care about morality, the people who would do it anyway. Right. And I'm saying if, like, say tomorrow Parliament dissolved, the Queen relinquished her claim to Canada, all that stuff, I think it would just be a matter of, different gangs taking different territories and stuff like that. And they would be the ones we're kicking up our money to. And at the end of the day, I'd rather be under the control of someone like the Queen, who has she's from a line of people for 1,000 years who have seen as their responsibility to make sure that Britain and the Commonwealth and all that are a good place to live. I'd rather be under someone who sees that as a responsibility than someone who just, sees power because that's not there anymore.
Yeah. So you prefer the devil that you know rather than the devil you don't know. And I actually agree with you. If the dichotomy, if the choice was between what we currently have and a bunch of gangs, sort of
Fair
competing for
enough.
power and
I guess I
whatever.
did present a bit of a dichotomy there.
So yeah, it's a bit of a false dichotomy because I'm actually saying that that is not the other option. The other option is, yes, there will be people who are immoral. There will be people who break those moral rules, but the only way we're going to get to a kind of society that I'm talking about is more and more people being consistent with morality and holding to that position of consistency in their political views, not just their political views, but in their personal life too.
Mhm.
Like for example, if I believe that assault is wrong on a societal level, it's wrong for one citizen to assault another. I believe it's also wrong for a parent to assault their children. I know assault sounds like a terrible word, but that's what spanking or hitting your children is. It's assault because they're not, it's not with their consent. So the idea here is we would have people who break moral rules in an anarcho-capitalist society.
Mhm.
It's just we would have new ways of dealing with that. It wouldn't just be a monopolized, centralized way of dealing with those people. It would be it would be a competitive environment in which, and I'm not saying I know exactly what it's going to look like, but that's kind of the point. Is that
Yeah.
I don't think there is any one person or any group of people who can figure that out and do it
Yeah.
well.
You've been asking me a lot of questions. My question for you, based on what you just said, was so in an anarcho-capitalist sort of society, how would you approach crime? Because, like, in theory, like, if it's all a matter of voluntary submission to whoever's in charge of a certain area, like, if you say you're guilty of murder, can I just leave and go somewhere else? Like, how does that work?
That's a fantastic question. I actually, you know what? We should really do a whole episode on that, especially if we get any feedback if people are interested in.
Yeah.
What would practically an anarcho-capitalist society look like in terms of the services that government provides?
Hmm.
Yeah, in a perfectly government less centralized government society, you could potentially leave a certain geographic location and not have to be under the punishment or the consequences of your actions for that particular wherever you did the crime, right?
Yeah.
You could go to another country or another location where there's different people in charge of those kinds of services. But what would probably happen is agreements would be made with these various companies that you would not allow services to be given to people who break. Like if I own a rights agency or whatever they would be called, rights protection agency or whatever. I don't want to insure people because that's what it would be. It could be kind of like an insurance sort of system. I wouldn't want to insure people who are known criminals, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to have an agreement with other rights agency companies and say like, you tell me if they've broken a crime, if they've broken a law or a criminal, and I'm not going to insure them. And then suddenly, no matter where that person goes, they don't have any rights protection. And again, this is hypothetical. This is just an idea, a thought. But the point is that there are lots of intelligent people out there who are proposing ideas of what that society could look like. But here's the thing: as opposed to the centralized government that we have, whether we like it or not, that's what we got. And yes, there's voting, and that changes things sometimes. But as you already said, it's sort of like it maybe changes it too quickly sometimes or doesn't change it quick enough other times, right?
Hmm.
But in a competition based approach, the people the ideas that actually work the best would have the most customers, so to speak. And or not even so to speak, it just they would have the most customers. And those ideas would win out. Or if there was a better idea, that idea would eventually win out. So to me, I'm just saying, I don't even think that it makes a whole lot of sense to say, let's shut down the federal government tomorrow, right? I'm more so thinking, let's start making it legal for people to go their own way, for people to have competition with the government. Like if you didn't want to use the legal tender of a country, right? Right now, at least in the States, I'm pretty sure it's probably the same here in Canada. If you started to use gold and silver as currency, you'd be, I don't know, fined or put in prison or whatever. It's illegal.
Hmm.
But in a free society, or if we're moving towards an anarcho-capitalist society, we would have competition when it comes to the use of money. Just something as common, as simple as the use of money. Like if I didn't want to use Canadian dollars and I wanted to use silver instead, I should be free to do that. And then if there's more people using silver than Canadian dollars, well, that's the people have spoken, right? And the people who want to keep using Canadian dollars are free to do so, but the people who don't are also free to do so. That's why I've said before, happy to say it again, anarcho-capitalism is the only system that allows for completely different political viewpoints all under one umbrella. Because if you want to have socialism, for example, you're free to go build a community in which you have socialism, right? And if you have lots of people join you, then you have a big geographic location in which that happens. But the key is you don't force anybody to be a part of it. And the people who don't want to be a part of it can go and live their lives the way they want. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. It just seems like in a lot of ways it would be like pretty much just undoing the framework we have now to put a different one in place that'll pretty much lead us to the exact same place anyway. That's the only kind of, and maybe that's what you mean. Like maybe you're like, yeah, it'll basically be the same, so let's do one that's more voluntary. But at the same time, it's like for example, right now, even though you're free to, you know, for example, shop wherever you want, it's like there comes to a point where it's like you're just going to go to Walmart because it's easy and convenient anyway. And obviously, like in a way that is a good thing, but it's like it does like functionally begin to take away that choice that you're proposing we bring back, you know?
Yeah, I do think people are tend to go with the easier options and the more readily available options. But Walmart, let's remember, didn't start out at the level that it is now. Mm-hmm. How did it get there? And I don't know the ins and outs of its history. So if they did get there through immoral means or by using government force or whatever, I'm not entirely sure. But I'm going to guess they got there because they came up with a model of having a store where you could buy anything you wanted in Walmart. Walmart's a great store because you go in and you pretty much can buy anything and everything that you need. The prices are good because of how they deal with the middleman and all that, or I don't know, I'm not sure how it works. The point is this: Walmart got to its position the way where it is now because people like to shop there and want to shop there. But you don't have to if you don't want to. There's plenty of people who don't shop at Walmart, would much rather shop somewhere else than they do. So that's
my point more so is that like it just becomes de facto control over a certain area after a while. And I mean, and in like certain areas of commerce, like I think that's a good thing. Like obviously Walmart is more convenient, but I think when it comes to government, if like the whole idea is we're trying to give people options, like it's gonna maybe at first, like that's sure there's like all these different communities wherever you want to go, fine, but like eventually it's going to be like there's going to be a community that maybe absorbs the rest, and then functionally it's just a country anyway where you have to live there and you don't really have much of a choice.
But if that is that a good or a bad thing?
I'm just saying, like, that's basically what we have right now. Like you could leave Canada and go somewhere else, but like
right?
No.
Right. Okay, so on a worldwide level, we have anarcho-capitalism in the sense that there is no hierarchy above the countries as much as the United Nations or whatever would like
there to be.
But there's no among the countries, there's no governing agency or governing body, so to speak. So again, I guess that's my position is we keep on decentralizing government to the point where wherever that ends up on a free market basis in terms of where the consumer can actually dictate as opposed to being forced, that's fine. That's where it ends up. So like if it ends up where people get absorbed into a community or whatever, the key, whether or not I would be okay with that or not, is how did that happen? Did it happen because those people agreed to it? Fine. But were they like held at gunpoint to do it? Then that's not so fine because that's immoral. Mm-hmm. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does.
So it's all of this. It's like, and this is why sometimes I like to say, what would you do with me in that society? Mm-hmm. If I didn't want to be a part of your society, what would you do with me?
Oh, yeah,
no, I don't mean necessarily. That was slightly rhetorical, I guess.
Yeah.
But you see my point is that it's easier to talk about using force in a general, impersonal sense. But what if you had to use force on on a family member or a friend, right?
Yeah.
So that's the difference. Is I wouldn't want to force you to see things my way or to, and we're trying to demonstrate persuasion right here in our podcast, right? We're not forcing each other to our viewpoints. We're strongly trying to persuade one another, but we're not trying to force each other. And that's what I think a good moral society would be: a society in which we try to persuade each other, but we never force each other. And may I say, to end the podcast, no king but Jesus.
I was waiting for that one to come out.
There you go. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. I think that was a fantastic discussion. I think I understand your position a little better, and I'm sure you've heard me say all these things before, but it's good to say it in this context and in this discussion. So maybe we'll do another episode very soon about what it practically would look like in an anarcho-capitalist society, and maybe that would be beneficial to you and anyone else who's interested.
Sure.
All right. Well, thank you so much for watching this week's episode of Variologies. If you'd like to support us, you can do so by clicking on subscribe here on YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're listening to this, subscribe to Apple Podcasts or to Spotify. You can contact us at variologies@gmail.com. And we also have a closed private Facebook group in which you can discuss anything we've been talking about. Or also, we have my website, messianicniagara.com, in which you can donate to us via PayPal. We do have some costs associated with this podcast, and so we would appreciate any support you can give us. Thank you so much to those who have given and have supported us in these various ways. We're very grateful, and we're going to keep doing this as long as there's some kind of interest, or really just until we run out of ideas.
Pretty much.
There you go. All right, Manoa, you have a great week.
Yep, you too.
You, keep playing video games, but also keep doing some work as well.
For sure, yeah. I hope you beat Donkey Kong this week.
Perfect. Thank you. I'll let you know how it goes, for sure.
Sounds good.
All right. Take care, Noah, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you again next time. This has been Variologies. I'm Dan Calcagno.
And I'm Noah.
Have a good week.